I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
How? How do you manage every time to pick open a wound to a fresher hell?
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddities.
My IQ is the highest among all Reddit.
That's not saying much.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
There's something beyond the direct physical observable world. You can't quantify, you can't put under a microscope. If you don't want to, immediately adopt the Muslim understanding of that, that's fine. You'll get there eventually.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
It's not just witchcraft, it's nerds. You guys are nerds. My parents didn't let me read Harry Potter, not because of the demonic elements. They just didn't want me to be a nerd.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy that week.
I've always deemed myself an evil capitalist.
Because that's how they get you. They get in your head. They start making you ask funny questions. And before you know it, bang, you're a liberal.
I thought it was a matter of record.
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This week we are joined by Mineya. He is a YouTuber, and I don't know if I can begin to describe everything he does, but he's very good at what he does, and to my knowledge, he is probably the largest fan of the Avatar franchise that I have met on the internet, which is, I guess, part of why he's here. How's it going today from all the way from Australia?
Hello. Yes. Pretty good, actually. Pretty good. How are you today?
Good. Well, it's different days for us.
Early.
Really. So, well, it's early for me, late for you, which is I've done podcasts with people from South Korea, and there's that I've experienced that time difference before, but it doesn't get any better the more I try to do it.
It's a weird one, isn't it?
It is. Usually, it's I've done. I have always a bunch of friends in the UK, and that one, it's like, okay, it's 10 in the morning here, it's 7 o'clock there, but that's not too bad of a difference. But in this case, I just needed to medicate a little bit to get through it. But tis life. How was your day?
Pretty good, pretty standard. Working hard, you know how it goes. I've got a lot on my plate. I'm working on a huge comic book at the moment, which I can't really talk about yet. But it's like 30-something issues long, like it's ridiculous. So that's fun. It's my first time working for someone and not for myself when it comes to writing, which is really cool. So that's been taking up a bunch of my time. But, it is what it is.
So I guess for the sake of clarity, could you tell people about what your channel is and what you do, and about your surprisingly animated avatar at the moment?
So I'm Mineya. I'm just a big dork in all. Like to keep it simple, that's who I am. So I do a little YouTube thing. I have a lot of strange opinions about things, and a lot of people think it's some sort of like facade or charade about all the sort of weird things that I do and say. So I figured I would record it and put it on the internet, so that people can generally tell me I'm wrong. And it's a lot of fun. Outside of the YouTube channel, I'm an author. I write comic books and novels. You can read some of those up on Archiven, but a lot of them are in production with artists, etc. at the moment, which is all fun. When I'm not doing that, I'm a musician. I'm a classically trained singer, and I'm an MMA fighter. So I do that on the side too. Just a couple of hobbies.
Just a couple hobbies, things that easy things to balance your life around, I'm sure.
I'm holding back for the sake of time.
There you go.
There is more.
So
I'm just an all-round dork.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you've been going off for at least the past 3 weeks on Discord about Avatar: The Way of Water. How are you enjoying that frenzy at the moment?
I am loving the fact that we finally have another Avatar movie out. It's been 13 years in the making, and I'm very, very, very happy, and I'm excited for the future of the franchise. And yeah, I'm happy to be here to talk about it. I understand you saw it as well.
I
Um,
did. I've been
I
meaning to go back and see it again because I that first experience was very good, and I wanted to do the IMAX again before it trickles out of
yeah,
theaters for a while. But it's the
yeah,
first time
I'm
it left its mark the first time, and I felt like there's a lot there's a lot of clarity to it, so I didn't feel like I'm forgetting anything going into
hmm,
this. So
I'm a little bit jealous because we don't have an IMAX where I am.
oh shoot.
We have yeah, we have like a Limax which is too small to be considered an IMAX. And so they called it an IMAX when the first Avatar came out to like get the dollars in. And then they got in trouble and they had to like stop advertising it as an IMAX. So we don't actually have an IMAX here. Our cinemas where I am in the world are quite, they're just not as grand as what I've seen of other countries and other parts of this country too. So yeah, I'm a little jealous of that. I've not been able to see it in like a proper IMAX setting. I've probably seen it more than you, but I haven't seen it in an IMAX setting.
I didn't know there were fake IMAX theaters. That's news to me, but I guess it makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, we call them Limaxes, and basically they try to just say it's an IMAX, but it doesn't meet because it meets some specifications, but it doesn't meet the size specification. A lot of the cinemas here are nowhere near as large as what like actual IMAXs are. Yeah, so my first viewing was in like a small little VIP cinema. It only held like 10 people. And I was actually kind of bummed out because the screen was too small. So, and we had to sit quite far back. And so, like, there was a lot lost in that. But subsequent viewings with different screens, I've been going around where I live, which, like, I've been driving hours at a time to find like the best cinemas. So it's been fun, but definitely worth at least one more viewing, just to get that full experience in. Um, Especially if you can find one with a high frame rate, because it's it's interesting. It's yeah.
I,
But
I,
I don't
I
know if you've seen
I really
with
did pick
high
the best
frame
person to bring on to talk about this. What is
rate.
what was it? You know, waiting for 13 years from that first film. I don't want to bury the lead, but waiting for 13 years, like, was it frustrating for the sequel to
No,
take this long to come out, or at least
no, not at all.
at least from a a naysayer perspective? Because I remember for the longest time, I didn't believe that they were actually going to release the sequels. I thought this was just a pipe dream that was just going to be a thing that they keep saying they're doing it, and they keep going down to New Zealand and shooting things, but it's just never gonna happen. They keep putting it on the Disney schedule, but they keep moving it back, and it just felt like it was never gonna be a thing. It was like it felt like they were funneling money to the mob at times, but you don't know what they're doing until it actually happens, and then all of a sudden it's in theaters. Is that vindicating?
It's nice. It's I think because the movies, the first one obviously was filmed in New Zealand, and they filmed a bit of it in New Zealand again, I believe, but most of it was done in LA this time. But I think we get a little bit more like, even though I'm not in New Zealand, Australians will, the Australian viewers out there will understand what I mean by this. But Australia and New Zealand sort of like promote each other a lot, and it's a big deal to have like a movie film down this way. It's the same with Lord of the Rings. So I think we got more Avatar exposure down here than maybe you guys do. Like it was like when the movie came out, there were documentaries being aired on TV of how it was made, and New Zealand did like a big tourism campaign around it and all this stuff. And obviously their tourism campaign goes straight to us because that's where most of their tourists come from. We're the closest to them. So it's this thing where it wasn't really, it was kind of strange because it never went away. And it was one of those movies as well where, like you would go to like an electronics store and it was like the movie on the TV, it's like the one they used to try and sell all the TVs. And when 3D TVs were a thing, it was, every TV as well. And it kind of, yeah, it just never went away. It was always lingering. And I would read all the things like I was obviously on the Avatar forums before they were closed down. And yeah, it was just one of those things where I read all the news and the updates. I was there when all the castings were announced, and I was sort of in the loop. And then you're right, like I was like, I'd be talking to people like, this Christmas is the year. Like this is the Christmas we see Avatar 2, and it never was. And then when 2020 hit and things got really bad, I was sort of doubting. I was like, oh, we're probably gonna have to wait like another 5-10 years. Like they may not actually do it. But then we got the trailer last year, and like early last year, and that sort of, was a huge relief and almost weird to see because you're talking to someone who's seen the first Avatar over 100 times. So almost weird to see these characters not in that movie because I get so used to the screen grabs and the screenshots and like everything from the first movie, and then the second I see a second one, it's almost uncanny to me now because I'm like, where was that in the movie? And I'm, oh no, it's the sequel. I got to remember the sequel's out now.
I guess there's a level of I guess there's a level of localism to that. I mean, I grew up within an hour of the cities where they shot Groundhog's Day and then Man of Steel, and in both cases, both those towns still do festivals celebrating the fact that they shot a movie there like decades ago. And with Man of Steel, it's a little more morbid because because the town gets entirely destroyed. But
they blew the city up.
Yeah, but you're walking around this little tiny town, and they're having a carnival, and they're selling concessions, and there's like a George Reeves Superman standee sitting around. I'm like, I know what happened here. That's not what happened in this city. You all died, but people
all died. It was a big crater in the ground.
People are sentimental about those things, so it's I get why Australia and New Zealand would be so.
It's big for business.
Yeah.
Just like when Lord of the Rings came out, that was a huge tourism campaign for New Zealand as well. Unfortunately, the only movie that I know of, like worldwide movie that was actually filmed where I live, was the original Power Rangers movie.
I was gonna say, how far are you from where they shot some of the Mad Max stuff?
Oh, nowhere near. That was all filmed on the other side of the country.
Okay.
And in the middle of the country. I'm completely on the opposite side.
Okay.
But the Power Rangers movie, the scenes where they're in like, no one knows what I'm talking about now. You're all too young. But the scenes where they're all in like the rocky area just before they get their new powers, that was filmed where I live.
I was gonna say I've seen enough rock quarries on YouTube that I could probably I can visualize it. I just don't know which.
Well, the actual rock quarry was filmed in Sydney on the other side of the country, but like they did this bit where it's meant to be like a desolate wasteland area with all these big skeletons and stuff, and that's where I'm from. The morbid, depressing scene is where.
There you go.
Yeah. That's my only claim to fame. Like all we have for where we live is, well, Power Rangers was filmed here 20 years ago.
I think there's one of those everywhere though. It's like there's always the one thing that was filmed here. It's like it's.
Yeah.
I remember back the weird one in my hometown was that they shot the Johnny Depp Public Enemy movie there, just because the architecture looked vaguely similar to what John Dillinger would have been around when he was alive. So it's like, we'll just shoot all the outdoor scenes there, and then just let Johnny Depp walk around a little bit, and for about 5 years, everyone's like, oh, I saw Johnny Depp, but. Yeah,
they will be going on about that for a decade. Yeah,
yeah, people still do that thing, but I guess going back to Avatar, what is it about that movie that made you watch it 100 times? Because, I mean, obviously it's very good movie, but it seems like that's kind of a minority opinion in some regards.
I was gonna say you can't say that publicly; you'll get flamed.
I said it's a good movie. I didn't say it's Citizen Kane, but.
Don't you know it's just a ripoff of like 3 other movies?
There's nothing new under the sun, though, so whatever.
I don't. It's sort of a weird one, like like there's people who really like Star Wars, and there's people who really like Star Trek, and there's people who overly identify with Harry Potter. And the same goes for like Lord of the Rings, for example. Like you've got those sort of things. Well, I was never a huge like Star Wars fan. Like I liked the very first three when I was very young, but then when I revisited them in my teen years, I actually kind of found them to be a bit of a drag. Um, I don't like Lord of the Rings either. I find that like I respect it. Just before anyone comes at me, I respect it for what it is, but I've never actually been able to sit through it.
That's some flame war stuff for the internet. So
I know, and I don't like Star Trek. I've just never really dived into Star Trek. And when Harry Potter was like a big thing, and all my classmates were reading that, I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire. So I was like, what is this kid fantasy thing? Like, I can't do anything with this. And so, you know, I kind of missed all those things and I wasn't really into them. But for some reason, Avatar clicks with me. And I think it's because in my personal life, for a number of years, I was a veterinary assistant and I was a native animal rehabilitator. And I spend a lot of time outside. Yeah, I think the sort of planet, sorry, it's a moon. Sorry. I know I'm the only one who's going to pick up on that, but the moon, Pandora, it felt very homely. I really dug the characters. Sam Worthington and I went to school together. So there's a little bit of homegrown spirit, because if anyone knows where we went to school, like it's the slums of Australia. So it's kind of like you kind of want to be like, yeah, you made it. I didn't, but you did. And I'm going to latch onto that for a minute. Yeah, so there has to be one success story. It was just like, it was when I watched it the very first time, I knew nothing about it. I saw one picture of a stern beast. And I was like, what's this sci-fi movie coming out? And I was like, who's this James Cameron guy? And I know that's kind of weird to say, but I didn't really know directors back then. And then I was like, oh yeah, it's the Terminator guy. So Terminator's great, Titanic's fine. And so, you know, I said to my wife, I was like, hey, why don't we go see this new James Cameron movie? I like Terminator, you like Titanic. And the first time and obviously it was 3D, and I'm a big nerd, and I'm one of the few people who still have a 3D TV and still watch 3D movies. And so I was like, you know, let's try this 3D thing out in the cinemas. We've never done that before, and let's watch this movie by someone who we both like what they made. And we both just absolutely loved it. I think, yeah, it was just one of those things that sort of attached onto me. And I'm the sort of person who, when I like something, I get deep into it. Then I got the books, and I was reading all the interviews, and I was, you know, I went back, I watched the first Avatar 8 times in theaters over the span of 2 weeks. And I dragged all my friends along, and I dragged family along, and I said, oh, you have to see it. Of course, none of them liked it, but I did.
So you're the reason why it made 2 million domestic.
Pretty much, yeah. So James Cameron, if you're out there, you know, I look good in blue. But yeah, it was just one of those things. It's kind of, for me, it's my big nerdy Star Wars like thing. And I know it doesn't have, you know, 9 movies, but you know, it's got one very good movie.
You said yet,
and well,
but...
now 2.
I mean,
yeah, I know. We'll see. It's gonna happen. It's already turned a huge amount of money, and the sequels are a guaranteed thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just sort of got into it. I even played the video game. I famously live streamed myself playing the Avatar PC game, and I did both the human and the Na'vi story in one sitting in one day. And I just streamed the whole thing from start to finish, because I was that into it. I was one of those guys that got like post-Avatar depression. I just kept like watching the movie over and over again.
Oh man, I remember that. I'm sorry, you know, my condolences, but
I mean, you know, I'm sort of making a joke there. There's a bittersweet feeling when you watch one of these movies. I got a similar vibe with Top Gun Maverick recently as well. Like, there's when you grow up in like the 80s and the 90s, and you're used to cinema, and then, you know, that kind of went away for a while, and this movie feels very nostalgic, because it kind of has a lot of those 80s 90s tropes that I think modern audiences don't quite understand.
it's
find a bit cheesy or corny.
It's so much more earnest than so many of the recent films.
Yeah, yeah, and like if we're looking at the first movie, like Quaritch is a bad guy. His lines are so cheesy, and yeah, like you're not in Kansas anymore. Super memorable line, but not original at all. But it works for him because you can imagine he probably says this every single time there's a dropship landing, and like this is his thing that makes him feel all cool. And then you've got like all these just ridiculously over the top like BDE scenes where like where he kicks the door open and he just goes and just takes the biggest breath he can and starts shooting everyone. And then in the big battle at the end, he's on fire and he's ignoring it to fight. And then eventually he pauses to like wipe it out, and the whole coffee cup drinking thing. Like it's over the top but subtle, but also just very cheesy. And it's just like, yeah, he's a bad guy, but he's kind of a cool bad guy, and you can't help but like not root for him. But when he's on screen doing this stuff, you can't help but be like, "Ooh, that's so cool!" Like, like with how just like determined he is. And then like Sigourney Weaver, like the first thing she says in the movie is, "Who's got my goddamn cigarette?" Like it's just like so like quintessential. If you go back and watch a lot of 90s movies, it was all catchphrases and just sort of cheesy dialogue and stuff. And this sort of still has that essence. So there's a lot of nostalgia in it for me as well. Because a lot of movies these days are trying to be too complicated or trying to like, be too subtle with things or stand out from the grain. And it's nice to have something, like you said, that's a bit more earnest and knows what it is and isn't trying to hide that, but just sort of almost celebrate it in a weird way. And I think that's why why it pulls the numbers it does, to be honest.
Yeah, I've heard some people say the original Avatar is emotionally manipulative, but in some ways I think that's just the act of putting out a film like this. I mean, it's one of those movies where you can see all the strings, but the string that are like trying to pull at your heartstring and pull at your heart and bring certain emotions at you, but they all work. It's not
trying to trick you.
Yeah, it's got that Spielberg kind of thing to it where you
very
see,
much
you see all the wheels in motion, but it still hits you. Like
as a writer, I have that problem with everything though. Recently I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I won't comment on the movie, but I saw the case, like the Blu-ray case, and I looked at my wife and I said, I bet this is what the movie's about, and I just listed the movie to her, and all I knew was the title and the cover, and then we put the movie on, and within about 30 seconds she just looked at me and she goes, again, really? Because this is what I do. But with Avatar, because it knew people knew, like it was like you knew like, oh, this guy's gonna go to this place and he's going to side with the name. Like you knew that immediately going into it. Everyone knew that. It wasn't trying to hide it. It wasn't trying to be like some big twist at the end where you're like, he turned sides. Like no, like it wasn't. It wasn't trying to be anything. It wasn't. It was just trying to tell an honest, fun story, and I think that's why it resonated with a lot of people, but also probably why it doesn't get the discussions publicly, that a lot of other movies get, is because it didn't really do anything sneaky. It didn't blow. Like Inception, was a movie where everyone was like, oh, I was so confused. Is he there? Is he not? The thing never stopped spinning. But you don't get those conversations with Avatar because there's really not much to converse. It just told a story, a good, solid story.
So now that we have Avatar: The Way of Water, how do you think that one compares to the original?
It's complicated. It's very complicated. There's a couple of things that is this spoilers okay, or are we hiding spoilers? I'll be polite and try to hide spoilers.
It's ostensibly been a month.
In a month.
Yeah, so you can feel free to go whatever you want to talk about.
There's a couple things that were interesting. So I love the fact that it didn't try to rush us through anything. Like it really took its time and said, hey, here's what happened. Like here's your little catch up on what happened. Here's where they are now. And it sort of did this thing where you kind of were getting comfortable, you were sitting back in the chair and you're like, oh yeah, here's the trees I remember and the soundtrack and the characters. And then they're looking up at the sky and you see that little star. And it's like you see the look on Jake and then you see the look on Nitiri, and then you realize you have that same look because you realize what that star is, and it kind of like, and then from that moment on, it's everything's a go. But it took its time to sort of let you ease back into it. And then in the final act, I feel like it almost feels like this is my only complaint that you'll get from me about this whole movie, a rare time where I complain about the movie. The final act, everyone's there, the Met Hyena are there, and they're all gonna fight, and they've all got their reasons for fighting, and then the Met Hyena disappear, literally disappear. And I know there's a big ring of fire around the boat, but that happens like halfway through that scene. It doesn't happen at the beginning of it. And I just couldn't help but wonder, like, did James Cameron forget? Because he's not the sort of person to miss a detail. And I feel like just because of that one scene, that leaves me a little bit sort of like, But at the same time, we both know there's probably an extended cut of this coming out, just like the first one. I think we'll get more of that in the extended cut. So I'm holding off on that final assessment, but I think it's on par with the first one. In some cases, it's like, obviously the CG's better, the facial tracking's better, the water scenes are like, if you've ever been diving or swimming, it looks like, I mean, Aquaman coming out this year is probably sweating a little bit, with how they managed to do that. You have to give kudos to Sigourney Weaver. I know there's a lot of naysayers out there who are like, oh, she didn't sound like a 14, 13-year-old girl. But it was believable enough for me. And the way she moved and stuff was believable too. I know they had a young girl like be her stunt double, who did some of the more like, heavier scenes for her because, I mean, they couldn't have been easy for anyone, let alone someone in there. What, is she 70 now? Yeah, so, but I think it's on par. I think there's a lot of things that it does that are really cool, but I think it's on par with the first one.
In some ways, I think I like this one a little bit better, just because it feels like it's a little more confident, and it's kind of going off into its own territory. It
definitely tugs at the heartstrings a lot more. Like, it gets a more emotional response out of me. But I recently went back and watched the extended cut of the first movie, and I got the same emotional heartstrings with that cut because of the information I now know that was revealed in this movie. So now I've got like an even stronger connection to like the planet and the things going on there. So yeah, you might be right. It may be better, but I need to watch it a ton more because I've had 13 years to soak up the first one.
The family stuff, I think, was what made it work for me the most.
100%.
Like, because just having that emotional core of relationships, it just kind of added this constant sense of dread to the entire proceedings.
The first scene, this blew my mind. The very first moment where the kids are in the jungle and Quaritch and his band are like at that site at the end of the first movie, sort of reliving everything. And then like, and they sort of cross paths. When that happens, I caught myself sort of going like catching my own breath, and everyone in the cinema was sort of like, you could hear them all doing the same thing. And that was when I knew immediately. I was like, okay, I'm in. Like everyone in this scene, everyone is so immersed in this. So I could hear them audibly gasp, and they started whispering, like, I could hear people like, oh no, don't do it. Stay hidden, kids. Like, they were really sold on it. And I don't get that experience with any other movie. Like, I've never had that happen in a cinema. I know stereotypes maybe, but Americans are a bit more vocal in cinemas, but over here it's normally dead quiet. So to have like audible gasps and stuff, it wasn't just me who was like feeling the dread. I don't know how James Cameron gives you that feeling of dread, but it was the first time I've seen kids in a movie and I've thought, oh, I need to protect these kids. Because normally when kids are in a movie, I'm like, they're not going to do anything to the kids. They're kids. They can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, but in Avatar, I really felt the threat there. And I don't even have kids, but I felt the threat. I wanted to protect them. I felt like a father as well. And that was really incredible. I mean, I had grown men, the very first time I watched it, I had grown men get up and walk to the back of the cinema and they were like crying at certain scenes in the movie. And I've never seen that either in a movie. So that was really interesting. I was sort of watching them walk up and down the aisle, like you guys crying right now? Like, is that what's going on? It's okay. I've got a lump in my throat too, but you guys are crying.
I mean, I didn't even see that. I mean, obviously, all the Americans clapped at the wrong time, but you know, what are you gonna do? But, I didn't. But yeah, I mean, the fact that I was feeling dread, like, okay, this movie is working. You know, the only real problem I think I had with the movie was just that the fact that they're prematurely know where the plot is going meant that they kind of ended it just as it was kind of losing a lot of just it was getting a lot of steam, and it made me frustrated that we don't have the other parts of it done yet.
Yes, so that's the other thing as well, is knowing that this is part one, like it does feel like Avatar 1 is like a prequel to a bigger story. Like it really feels like they're not really connected. Like Avatar 1 was like the warm up. Avatar 2 feels like what Avatar 1 really is. And you know, Avatar 3 is actually like 2.5. Like it's the second half of that movie. And James Cameron even said it, like, this movie doesn't really end. It's the beginning of Avatar 3. Like it's one long story now. It's not individual stories with a beginning, middle, and end. That's why he filmed them back to back as well.
Which I'd say that's generally, I'd say that's generally a major weakness for a story like this, because you need a film. I want a film that's usually somewhat, what's the term? It can stand alone to some degree. And when you have movies that are like, you have to wait a year till the next part so you find out what happens, it does this just overriding sense of inconclusiveness that's frustrating. But
do you know how no one just watches like The Lord of the Rings? Like, you know, they watch all three. It's like you either binge it or you don't watch it.
Yeah.
I feel like Avatar 1, you can just watch that and go on your way. But I feel like Avatar 2 needs 3 and 4. If that makes sense. Like, it's going to be one of those things where it's like, no, you can watch Avatar 1 and then next week we have to binge like 2, 3, and 4. Like, that's going to be like how people consume it in the future. Because that's kind of how it was designed, which is worrying because 3's reportedly, 9 hours long at the moment?
I don't believe we're going to get a 9-hour cut of Avatar 3. And I can only imagine.
Release.
And I remember
the Cameron cut.
I read the Cameron's demand to Disney was that he asked to animate all 9 hours of it.
All 9 hours, yeah. He wants Weta to do all 9 hours in full, like, finished CG. You know, 9 hours.
I really want to know who's going to win that fight, if it's going to be him or Bob Iger, because Bob Iger is fully within his capabilities as a producer to walk into that room and say, James, no, pick what you want in the final cut and we'll animate that.
If it was any other director, you're right. But the problem is James Cameron turns around and says, well, F off then. And then he just doesn't make the movie. Like,
oh man,
you know what I mean? Like that's his attitude. He's like, we do it my way and you trust and listen to me, or we don't do it at all. He was like that with the first movie. They wanted to make the Ikran flying scenes. They wanted those cut from the movie. Cameron basically said, no, they're staying in there because I want them in there. Like, that was his only reason. He goes, I know they're not, you know, adding to this and that. Like this, it was basically a storytelling sin. But he goes, but I want to see it, so I'm going to keep it in the movie. And no one could stop him.
I was gonna say, I thought that those added a lot of character to the first film, like just getting to see him getting brought further into that culture. So I think that movies benefit from that kind of, you know, going on extended digressions like that. So
I agree, and that's technically the moment in the movie that Jake and Neytiri actually fall for each other. It's right where he sort of flirts with her on the Ikran, and they sort of have their little giggle, and Sute tells them off. Because they're, you know, meant to be all mature and, you know, strict. So yeah, that it's like, it's an important scene for me, but the executives thought it was too long and didn't add to the story. But thankfully, Cameron got his way there.
What did you go into The Way of Water expecting? Was it more or less what you expected it to be?
So yeah. So this, I even have this on record. So, you know, like if you look on my YouTube channel, there's a video of me reacting to the very first like teaser trailer that came out, and along the lines of like, I basically spoil the entire movie in that video. Like in retrospect, I basically spoiled the entire movie, but that's what I was saying before. So movies, it's very rare that a movie surprises me.
Did you guess the whaling subplot?
That's the only thing I didn't guess, was the whaling being such a huge part of the movie. I knew, obviously, like, so here's from memory what I said in that video. I said, Jake, obviously he's got a family now. He's going to flee from the forest to the sea people to keep them sort of safe. And then I said, and it's really interesting because Quaritch is back, but this time he's a Na'vi. I said, so it looks like they've weaponized the Na'vi program, as the science, like, sort of diplomatic method failed originally. And because in that very first trailer, you get a very small glimpse of Quaritch stepping over a fern. And the only reason I knew it was him immediately is because I remembered his tattoo on his bicep. I said, that's Quaritch. That's Quaritch right there in the very first trailer. And I had people be like, hey, no, there's no way that's Quaritch. And I said, no, it's definitely Quaritch. That's his tattoo. And I had to bring up like screen grabs of his tattoo and stuff. Be like, see? I watch this movie 3 times a year. That's Quaritch's tattoo. And so, yeah, I sort of spoke about how I thought the movie would go, and I was pretty much correct. Yeah, there's probably a few very minor details. I didn't get the whaling. I knew the sea, like we would see the sea creatures and learn about them, but I didn't think we would have sentient whales that are humans, basically, giant whale humans.
Yeah, I mean, I read one of the things I read was that James Cameron was supposedly going to tone down the social commentary a little bit and just make it a little bit more of a family-centric story. And but when the social commentary comes, it's like it's very loud, and it's
very in your face this time.
Yeah,
much more in your face than the first one. But I feel like, as well, once again, I feel like the movie, it sounds weird because it's 3 hours and 14 minutes long, but it needs an extended cut, because that scene, like that whaling subplot, does feel a little ham-fisted in there. And I feel like there's maybe a scene before and a scene after that are missing, just like in the first movie. I don't know if you've seen the extended cut.
I don't think I've seen the extended cut of Avatar.
So in the extended cut of Avatar, it opens on Earth and it shows Jake on Earth doing Earth things.
I have seen that.
Earth apartment. Yeah. And then so you actually see Earth, and it's just Blade Runner Earth. Like, it's pretty cool. So it's cyberpunk Earth, and that really, for cyberpunk fans, it kind of sets the tone of what he's living in. And that makes like the actual cardboard coffin that his brother's in and stuff make more sense. And then you get to see that scene where they're in the school, and Jake immediately notices there's bullet holes in the chalkboard. And he's sort of looking at Grace, and he's like, what happened here? And she doesn't talk about it. She's like, you going to help us get these supplies or not, sort of thing. She's very guarded. And then there's the scene where she argues, this is in the normal cut now, but she argues with Selfridge, and she says, yeah, well, that tends to happen when you use machine guns on them. And so you can kind of link those moments up now. And I feel like they had way more emotional impact, and it sort of blended the movie better, because you get that other extended scene towards the end of the movie before the big climax. Sort of in the second third of the movie, where she's talking to Jake, and she talks about Silwanen and what actually happened at the school, and she's nearly crying, etc. About it. And she sort of opens up to him. And I feel like those 3 scenes specifically really add way more of an emotional impact to the movie, and work more on the family side, because Grace, the kids called her mother, like, you get that bonding time between all the science geeks that isn't really in there in the normal cut. And you get a little bit more fleshed out of, like, when things go wrong for the humans, they've shot at the Na'vi. Like, they just, the Na'vi, yeah, sure, they destroyed some of the machinery, but I don't think machinery warrants taking a life, like, even if it was human on human. it sort of shows like, well, these are mercenary grunts that, in my opinion, were kind of just cowboying it out there. Like, that's how I feel about it. And there's deleted scenes that show that Selfridge didn't really have control of Quaritch, and he was kind of doing his own thing and like setting things in motion to make things worse that never ended in the movie. There's even a scene where Quaritch like grabs Selfridge and he's like reminding him, he's like, "You're a long way from home, kid." I know it's another cheesy dialogue, but I don't like, there's, if you go through all the deleted scenes as well, like you can kind of see like the bigger picture there. And so there are those sort of like emotive bits that are missing, and I feel like they're missing. Like, I can see when I'm watching the movie from a like writing point of view where there's kind of these gaps where it's like, all right, something was here that was taken out. You can feel it in the pacing of the movie, and it doesn't make the movie bad. The movie's still, you know, the best movie of 2022, that's for sure. Maverick's a close second, but other than that, there weren't really many good movies last year.
I was going to say, if you haven't seen RRR yet, that's the other great movie about why colonialism
you know,
is bad.
RRR, fun little Avatar fact with RRR. No, I can link the two together.
There's no musical numbers in Avatar though, so unfortunately that's the only flaw. So
yeah, it's musical based. RRR, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't seen it, but I saw some clips online. It stole Avatar's musical score.
That wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
it's
very common
like,
for movies to use temp tracks and then just kind of score around it. So
well, obviously this is James Horner's score, but you know the score where in the first one where the tree's falling down, you get that trumpet, it's going no 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 no,
kind of, yeah.
Like, yeah, and then in the second movie they do the same thing with the whaling scene, the same soundtrack, because that's like the tragic soundtrack. In RRR, during the action sequence, they use that soundtrack, but they've just like rescored it so it's not like the Na'vi instruments, but it's the exact same chords and sequencing and like notes in the exact same progression. And I came across it because someone tried to tell me that Avatar ripped off, like Way of Water ripped off RRR soundtrack. And I had to remind them that that song was used in the movie 13 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely, we can link RRR and Avatar 2 together.
I was gonna say, my favorite. I mean, temp tracks are a curse in Hollywood. Like back in like 2017, 2018, I kept hearing movies that had the same musical, not the same. It's not exactly the same, but they had the same chord progression as the Mad Max Fury Road theme. Like you'd just be watching like Lego Batman or Guardians of the Galaxy, and all of a sudden you hear da-na-na-da-na-na-na-na-na. I'm like, wait a minute. It's like, okay, I know what song the editor was cutting to right now. So
it was very interesting though, like, because like in Avatar, it's a sad moment where that song's used, and in RRR they just made it. I'd have to listen to it again, but it's like a guitar or something doing it. So it sounds like actiony, and they've got like heavier drums in the background. So it's like dun 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 dun, dun. And it's like, well, okay, you thought you could cover it up, I guess. Thanks, Bollywood.
Who's gonna? What's gonna happen? Is James Cameron gonna sue the nation of India over RRR? I mean, he might like, you know, subsume their entire economic worth into his being.
I don't think he's worried about RRR when his movie just pulled, what's it sitting at 1.8 billion at the moment.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's
1.8 billion with an extended, like, he got permission from the Chinese government to extend the movie's run in cinemas through the Lunar New Year, which I like. If you don't understand the Lunar New Year in China, like, everything's shut. Like, they don't do that normally. So for them to go, no, we'll keep Avatar in the cinemas and we'll keep the cinemas open for you, Mr. Cameron. Like,
this is why you should fear this man. This man makes the Chinese bend to his will. Like, what does this guy have on them?
Look, if the third movie released at 9 hours, you know he's got unlimited power.
That's just called having good blackmail material. Like, you just gotta have the right video, and then all of a sudden, you know, people do things when you can prove things. So,
yeah. Do you think a 9 hour cut will ever get released?
Just as a matter of film history.
Do you think James Cameron at one point, like even if it's like 10, 20 years in the future, there's like an anniversary, like watch like the entire sequence uncut of like all the movies? And
There hasn't been a 9-hour movie since the silent era. Like that's
I know.
That's like one of those just you don't do that because it's not marketable. Like even Avatar, like the first thing Disney is gonna say is we're cutting it in half. No, we're putting it twice.
Yeah, you know what's crazy is because I'm a bit of a DC fanboy, and I've just gone through the trauma of executives and producers like destroying that universe. We won't go off on a tangent there, but we all know what I'm talking about. So it's very refreshing to have like a movie where James Cameron goes, "No, I'm keeping the scene," and the executives go, "Okay, Mr. Cameron." Like,
I mean,
like
none of those executives want to be the guy that gets fired for saying no to James Cameron. So,
exactly right. So yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, I mean, I would watch a 9-hour cut. I don't know if I'd like. Would I go to the cinemas for a 9-hour cut? Probably not.
That's why I think they'd have to.
Home?
That's why I think they'd have to cut it in half, because I think you could probably sell a 4-hour cut. Like that would be a hard sell, but at the very least, you had it. Avatar Part 1, 4 hours. That sounds like a real thing. Like that sounds like I could see that being a thing.
I just want to know why does he need the whole 9 hours? Like, that's a long time. And he's saying he can't cut the movie without seeing all 9 hours in full, like, finished CG production. Why? Like, what's in that? Like, show me.
Supposedly
James
the actual
Cameron, if you're out there.
I mean, you know better than I do, but it's supposedly the actual plot is supposed to start with movies 3, 4, and 5. So.
Yes. So 3. So. Shall I make some live predictions now? We'll see how much they come true in 2 years.
Go ahead, because I want to hear the general story arc for where this is going.
Okay, so here's my predictions, and bear in mind, we don't have a trailer for 3. I'm basing this off one sentence that James Landau said, and one sentence that James Cameron said. So we know James Cameron said they get to see the Anunnaki tribe, and we know they're not friendly. And we know in Avatar 5, Neytiri goes to Earth somehow. That's the 2 things that were confirmed. So here's my prediction is that Quaritch at the moment, he's beat. Like, he got beat. Spoiler alert, the bad guy didn't win. He technically didn't lose, but he didn't win. And so I think the RDA aren't going to be too happy with him. We know avatars are extremely expensive. That's why there's only 20 avatars in the first movie. Yeah, I know that number. There's 20 of them. They only made 20 avatars. And that's because of how expensive they are to make. And doing what they did with Quaritch and then growing him an avatar so that he could come back. They did that because he was a valuable asset. And he won that, he was winning that battle at the end. If it wasn't for what we'll call an act of God, like which they couldn't have accounted for. So I think when he goes back this time, one, he's a little bit torn. We know that scene in the movie, like he's not the same Quaritch. He's got a soft spot. And he's connecting with the animals. Like he's got a Nikran, right? So he's felt that soul synchronization that they have. Because when a Na'vi connects to one of these creatures, they can feel their heartbeat, they can feel their breath, they can feel their muscles twitching, like they actually sync with that creature. They can read their thoughts, like it's because the Quay that they have is actually directly linked to their brain and is an extension of their neural cortex. There's no doubt that he is seeing what Jake is seeing. But he's got more layers, he's got more to gain from helping the RDA than Jake had. Jake was a guy with nothing to lose, he didn't have his legs, was living in a crappy apartment, his brother's dead. Like his whole life was basically, at the end, he was just drinking his way to nothing and getting in bar fights. So he was very quick to sort of switch. But I think Quaritch 2.0 needs to understand that like there's no Earth for him. Like, was he gonna breathe a carbon filter the rest of his life and be the only Na'vi on Earth? Like, where's he go after all this? You know, if they destroy Pandora, and do what they want to do with Pandora, where's he go? This doesn't help him. So I think when he gets, like, with all the damage that's happened to him, I think he goes back to the RDA, and the RDA are pissed at him, essentially. And I think he goes off to this Ash Na'vi tribe, and he realizes, well, the RDA aren't going to be able to stop him. They're useless. So he goes and does Jake 2.0. So he goes to this Ash Na'vi tribe, and he, using his logic and his military mindset, goes, well, if Jake was able to win them over by flying a giant dragon, maybe I'll get my version of a giant dragon. And he convinces this other tribe, like, hey, I'm your, like, new leader guy. Like, I've done all these amazing feats and all this stuff. And this tribe that maybe are untouched by humans because they're in the poisonous volcanoes of Pandora, because they're an ash tribe, so they must be near the volcanoes. And we know they're volcanic if you've read the books about the moon and how it works. And you know they're very, very poisonous. So I feel like he goes there and he basically does what Jake did, and they all sort of believe him and follow him. And we know that 8 cycles back, there was a great war where the Na'vi did not speak to each other, and Neytiri's great-great-grandfather had to become Mukto to settle that as well. So I feel like maybe they're one of the tribes from back then, and they have like a grudge, and we get to see some Na'vi on Na'vi fighting and less RDA. And I feel like while they're doing that, Quaritch finds his people, and Jake obviously is trying to lead his people and do his thing, and they forget about the RDA, and the RDA are kind of like, yeah, sweet, we're just doing our thing. We're terraforming, we're doing what we want to do. These Na'vi are fighting against each other now because he's so obsessed with hunting down Jake. And I think they're going to realize, like, oh, the bad guys that are over there in the RDA, like, why are we fighting each other now? It's been, you know, years or whatever, and, you know, like, there's bad blood, but I feel like you're going to see Quaritch become more native. And then because of that, like, no one's really trying to stop the RDA, and they're going to get a hand in it. And then, obviously, I think you're going to see Quaritch and Jake maybe team up or maybe fight the RDA from different sides. And I think Quaritch is going to be a bit more successful than Jake at that. I think it's going to be a very interesting turnabout. And then, obviously, we have to work out, well, what happens in Avatar 4 that leads Neytiri to go to Earth? Like, how are they going to get her on Earth? Like, how's Jake going to sequester an aircraft and go to Earth?
I mean,
like, how's...
My 2 expectations going into Avatar 3 is that we'll probably see Jake. I think this will be his last film. And
you don't think he's going to stick around for 4 and 5?
I heard one rumor I heard said that the 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 are going to be focused more on the kids, which made it sound, which at least to me sounds like Jake goes out in a blaze of glory in the end of Avatar 3, and maybe he takes Quaritch with him, because I think the ending of the second film... Can I
dispel that for you?
Sure.
John Landau said that Jake takes Neytiri to Earth in Avatar 5 so that he can teach her that not all the humans are bad. And to try and teach her, So John Landau, so don't blame me for the spoiler. This was the executive producer on the movie. Okay. He said that Jake takes Neytiri to Earth so he can show her Earth, like show her what it actually is and why the humans are doing what they're doing on Pandora, and that not all these humans are bad, just this group of humans are bad. You know, these ones that work for these corporations, etc.
I didn't know the Jake part. I knew Neytiri went to Earth, but so I mean, do you really think they actually set foot on Earth's soil? Like, wouldn't Earth just shoot him down because he's clearly like an enemy of this whole planet? What is the Planet of the Apes movie where the apes go to Earth? I'm trying to remember which one.
Isn't that all of them?
Well, no, I mean, because the first few they go to the human. Well, the humans.
I don't know, like classic Planet of the Apes. I'm only aware of the Mark Wahlberg one and then the new trilogy.
Okay, because in the later sequels, they some of the apes end up traveling back to 1970s Earth, and they just kind of go on adventures.
I've seen cuts from that. The apes are in like these 70s suits and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, it's weird, right? I don't understand, like, Earth's at war with the Na'vi, like, because Earth is like if they don't terraform Pandora, they're done, according to them. And I feel like, like, how do you come away? Like, how do you set foot on Earth? Like, clearly they're gonna have some sort of security. Like, what's Jake gonna be able to have to allow them to set on Earth and leave and not be killed or imprisoned, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's very weird to me. I
mean,
have a sneaky suspicion that maybe he shows her Earth through technology. Like, he's like, hey, put on these goggles and I'll show you Earth. Like, maybe they don't actually set foot on Earth.
It sounds like the plot is going to be more kind of a, you know, there are bad Na'vi and good humans kind of thing, where it's like, oh, there's like good and bad people on both sides. So maybe it's like they go to Earth and they like cause like a civil war or something between the humans.
I don't know. It's so far ahead, and because these aren't 1.5 hour Marvel movies, they're actually, you know, like 3 hour movies where a lot can happen in that time. I feel like like Avatar 4. What if 3's 9 hours? How long is 4 going to be? Are we talking 18 hours of video before you even know 4? Or if they both get 3-hour cuts, that's still 6 hours of cinema. To sort of, you know, like you can do a lot with 6 hours.
Yeah. Maybe they released that as maybe they released that on Disney Plus as like a mini series or something, like the full 9-hour cut. But...
Yeah. So, but my assumptions are that you're going to see Quaritch turn more like addresses Na'vi roots, because they're not turning him human again.
Redemption arc for him, it seems like it's on the table, especially with the end of the second film being what it is.
So I feel like you're going to see that. We haven't even addressed Kiri. Like, Kiri's got this weird, you know, thing going on there.
She's implicitly like the Na'vi Jesus, immaculately
conceived. Like,
and...
clearly she's Awar's. I like to think she's Awar's eyes. Like, maybe Awar as a sentient being can't see what's going on the surface, but is feeling the imbalance. She's heard Jake's prayers, but she doesn't know what's going on. So she's given them Kiri to be like her eyes and ears, and actually show her like what is going on, like, so she can do something.
It's poor teenager with severe tinnitus and an inability to connect, and every time she plugs into the ancestors, her brain short circuits. So but is it really every time? Because we only saw it happen one time in that movie, and clearly she's like, obviously she must have connected to a soul tree before. You know, like, that's the thing the Na'vi do. They're like save points. I was gonna say, didn't the soul tree in the first movie get destroyed? So it's possible she might not have done that before.
That's one. So one of the tree of souls got destroyed, but then they went to their like sacred. Sorry, that was the tree of voices. And then the tree of souls is the one they saved at the very end of the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, but there are clearly there are multiple of these trees, and they're all connected to each other, which is why, you know, they could see what they see at the end of the movie, which it's really sad when you know Avatar lore and know they can only do that one time.
The connection, or
the at the end of the movie, like the very last sort of thing that like Jake and Neytiri do, without spoiling it for people, where they connect up to the underwater tree, and she's like, "Are you ready for this?" Like, they can only do that one time, have that moment one more time, and then Awa shuts them off from it. Yeah. So that's really sad when you think about it from that perspective, because this is them being like, this is our last time to do this thing, then we'll never really have it again. We'll just have like the voices and the memories. That's why she says, "Are you ready?"
There you go.
This is the thing, when you're a super nerd like me, like when Neytiri's singing like on her song chord, one, I already knew what song chords were, and two, I could understand her. So, so I was like, oh, this is really sweet. Like, she's singing about how happy she is to be a mother, and she's singing about like she's thanking them for bringing Kiri to her and all this stuff. Like, she's thanking Awar about like how happy she is, and I got that, and I was like, oh, this is really, really cute. Like, at the beginning of the movie, she's singing her song chord. And I'm like, oh wait, nobody else in this theater got that. I did. I was watching, I got Ian to watch the first movie, and she got the VIP experience because I translated every line of Na'vi dialogue for her.
And I called you a nerd on Discord, so yeah.
Yeah, so even all the stuff that like isn't subtitled, I was like, they were talking about this and they were saying that, like, and he said this.
So, using your plot prediction powers, what do you think they do with Kiri in the third film? Because it seems like they're setting up. It seems like they're setting up something rather massive with that, with the lore implications behind her.
I feel like she's going to have a major role, but I feel like it's also going to like take a back seat a little bit too, because I don't feel how's Sigourney Weaver going to keep doing it? You know what I mean? Like, sure, they've got a stunt double for her and all that stuff, and they can CG some extra animation onto her. But I don't know. I feel like she's going to have a significance, but they've always said like Pandora and Awa is about the balance. Like, she doesn't support, like, she doesn't take sides. It's about the balance. And I don't know if like Kiri is the thing that breaks the balance or the thing that protects the balance. Like that's the big question from a writing point of view: is she the anomaly or is she the savior? Because if she's the savior, then it's very straightforward, and she's going to use her newfound powers to stop the RDA. If she's the thing that like breaks the balance, like if she's the thing that breaks the balance, well, then the possibilities are endless as to what she could do from a writing point of view. She could be the thing that is Awa's downfall. Like, she could end up being a villain when you think about it. Like, if you want to go down that route, well, look, you know, she's obviously got a romantic connection to Spider. Spider's obviously torn between humans and Na'vi. After seeing Neytiri do what she did, I think he realized it. Like, I think in his mind, he sees her as a bit of a savage, because she was savage in this movie. And I feel like Kiri, being a teenager, is going to have that emotional thing where it's like, well, Spider or the Na'vi, and she doesn't really feel too connected with the Na'vi. Like, that's why she's rolling her eyes, and she's, you know, I don't want to take these family photos, and, you know, she's like, why am I different to everyone else? Like, she knows she's not really the same. So could she become like a Luke Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker scenario where she was meant to be the chosen one, but she's not?
That, given the general state of
is
storytelling,
James Cameron willing to do something like that?
Yeah,
or is he going to keep it very straight line?
Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that she's gonna go full, you know, space Jesus and just start like murdering the humans or something. Which
in Avatar 4, you've got to remember the only line that the executives gave Cameron when he gave him the treatment was "Holy fuck." So what happens? Like,
look, it's Jesus' death army.
Right.
Something about that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, but then there's also like, yeah, or maybe does she go to Earth with Neytiri?
That would be interesting.
Because well, we all know the Earth is dying, right? So does she go to Earth with Neytiri, and do they like revive the Earth? Does she become Earth's Awa and maybe like do a little, you know, Starman thing where she lives in the planet and keeps and saves the Earth?
That could be an interesting alternative, where it's the long form of the story is the Na'vi saving the Earth. Yeah, the Na'vi saving the Earth, which
because the Earth is dead,
or at least reawakening it in some like you know. There's
like, hey.
I you know, I could see James Cameron being hippy dippy enough to do is like, we're gonna make this an Age of Aquarius thing, and they're gonna go to Earth and awaken it, and it's gonna be nothing but John Lennon songs going forward.
Yeah, well, I really don't know, but all I know is from what I've seen of the movie, I believe we're gonna see Quaritch get a redemption arc. It's gonna be very hard to redeem him, but I feel like James Cameron is going to be able to do it if he can convince you, like. If he can redeem like Arnold Schwarzenegger from Terminator 1 to 2, then, you know, because in the first one he was like this, you know, murderous robot, and in the second one he's the cool guy. I feel like he could do the same for Quaritch.
It wouldn't be that hard because he's already halfway there, so.
And he's got a lot of fans. Like, a lot of the audience out there love him. There's a lot of people who hate the movie but love Quaritch. So maybe that, like, you know, but it's interesting. I definitely think we're going to see Quaritch get a redemption arc. I think we're going to see war between the Na'vi tribes. Like, I think Quaritch is going to create division against the Na'vi, because he's going to be one tribe's chosen one and Jake's the other. And we know the Na'vi fight amongst each other. So I think that's going to happen, and that's going to enable the humans to maybe do something more extreme. And that's when Quaritch is going to realize, well, these are my people now. Like, these are my warriors, not the humans, like these Ash people. I think Quaritch is going to be the one that goes to the Ash tribes and like wins them over with his bravado and strength and charisma.
I was gonna say this movie franchise is either gonna end with both planets being in ashes or both planets just being like, paradises.
Yeah,
it'd be really weird to imagine just all the humans go back to Earth and Earth just dies quietly and with dignity.
But for a movie franchise that so many people consider to be extremely shallow and so many people still think is a ripoff of other movies, even though no one's mentioning the fact that 3 Pinocchio movies came out last year. Like, how are we having this discussion right now if it was so shallow? Like, there's a lot to this movie if you just like sweep off like the top layer of leads. There's a lot going on and a lot of ways it could go. Yeah. But
even then, like, the sequel, like the first movie, is so simple. It's almost deceptively simple because by the end of it,
has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, especially with how much setup there is in the movie for what's going to happen. Like,
that's the annoying thing. I feel like between Avatar 1 and 2, we got 6 hours of setting up for a bigger story.
Yeah, which I would say that counts against it, but at least not.
Yeah, I'm so excited for what they do.
Yeah, so I want to see Avatar 3 through 5, see what goes, and then hopefully they do. I'll
definitely be seeing it.
I imagine they'll probably do 6 and 7 if those movies don't bomb. Which at the moment, I believe by the time this is up, we'll probably be close to Way of Water being a $2 billion, joining the $2 billion club alongside like 6
I wouldn't be
films,
surprised if by the time this is up, it'll be $2 billion. And if it does, that means James Cameron has 3 of the top 5 $2 billion movies in the world.
That is an insane thing that he managed to do that.
If he manages to do it, and look, the movie's got 2 more months in cinemas. I think it ends in February, and it's only needs to make 200 million?
Yeah.
Maybe 150 million at this point in time to get 2 billion. I think like it can do it, especially with the Lunar New Year. But if it cracks into the top 5, James Cameron has 3 of the top 5 movies at all time. And if you want to be a naysayer about this franchise, and it is a franchise now, it took Marvel 12 movies. 12 movies to crack into the $1 billion, with Avengers, Endgame.
Yeah.
And then Spider-Man Far From Home. 12 movies and every single well-known actor on the planet to get that momentum to do that. James Cameron gave you Sam Worthington and made 2.9 billion in one movie, and then 1.8 billion on another.
So far. I mean, lest we forget.
And I love Sam Worthington. Like, as I said, we grew up very same high school, lived in the same suburb, like everything. So it's like, I like him. I appreciate him for what he is. And I think he does a great job in these movies.
I'll throw this out there too. But
yeah.
Avengers Endgame briefly took over Avatar as the highest grossing film of all time, and then they released Avatar in cinemas, and it took the title back. So it's just because this franchise is unkillable. So I don't know how, but he manages.
I mean, James Cameron said, "Hey, I'm gonna give you Avatar 1 again. I've added literally a 4-second scene to the movie, and it's now in high frame rate." And people are like, "I'm sold, done. Let's buy tickets."
And it works. Don't bet against James Cameron. That's the moral.
Never bet against James Cameron. That is the moral of the story. And I do really feel like, this will be his sort of, this will be his swan song. This is what everyone will remember him for: Titanic and Transformers, Terminator. If only James Cameron did Transformers, that would have been cool. But I feel like Pandora and Avatar and what he's done now will be his legacy, where in 30 years' time, people will still talk about it. I think the message of these movies, because it's not human bad, Na'vi good. Like, that's not the message of the story. The message of the story is to look at what's going on around you in your house, in your neighborhood. How you can pick any city in the world and look at their waterway, and it's really full of trash. And it's one of those things where the message really is hey, we really need to, and you don't have to go vegan or anything like that. That's silly. But just look into, what we can do in our personal scenarios to be a bit more thankful for what we've been given with the planet. And I don't mean that in an extreme way, but that's all James Cameron's sort of asking in this. And he's showing it to you in an extreme way to get a visceral response from you. Like, that whaling scene is traumatic. the way he did the sound and the camera shots of like those like the spears like going through the air, etc. Like it really did feel like there were young kids in the cinema at some of these showings, and I was like, they probably shouldn't be seeing this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you felt the same, but I was like, this ain't a kid's film anymore.
No.
When you see Jake pull the tomahawk out when he's like going to save his kids the very first time in the jungle, and Jake's got the tomahawk and Natiri's got the bow, I'm thinking like, there's no way they're gonna show Jake tomahawking people. That ain't gonna happen. You know what I mean? We're not gonna see it, and they do it. You know what I mean? And then they did, the boat with the arm, and they had Natiri at the end, and I was like, how did this get the rating that it got? It's way more mature than like, how did James Cameron slip that in there?
Don't bet against him. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah, exactly right. He says what he wants to say. He does what he wants to do, and if he wants it to be PG, they put PG on it.
We're just about out of time, but can you tell people where they can find you and how they can support you?
Yeah, I have one thing I want to say about the movie. The guy on the boat that everyone thinks is the evil Australian guy, he's Kiwi. He's from New Zealand. That's not an Australian accent.
That's Jermaine Clement, the guy from Flight of the Conchords, right?
I have no idea, actually.
I thought it was.
Yeah, he's from New Zealand. He's a New Zealand actor. So stop calling that guy Australian. That's just putting that out there. It doesn't bother me, but just, you don't want to look like a silly Billy, do you? Other than that, you can find me on YouTube. Mineya is the channel name. It's Mineya. I just talk comic books, pop culture, Avatar. I'll do some music stuff in the future. And I do my own author writing stuff, etc. and just self-improvement stuff there too. Just whatever I feel like. It's my channel. I do whatever I want with it. But yeah, if you want to see some really weird opinions, like did you know I think that Jared Leto is a better Joker than Heath Ledger? There you go. Subscribe. Subscribe and tell me I'm wrong.
I've seen enough Flight of the Conchords to know the difference between an Australian and a New Zealander, but yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Anytime.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.